there hasn't been a lot of successful experiments showing a benefit to fungicide for control of blackleg when you have a moderately resistant or a resistant variety. If you're growing a susceptible variety, which I don't think really even exists anymore commercially, then fungicides can play a big role. So if you're in a really high-risk situation for blackleg and you think a fungicide is going to help you manage that issue, that 2 to 3 leaf stage in canola, and so there in some of these plots there's still canola at the 2 to 3 leaf stage. I'm seeing some really excellent plot hopping going on back there. Great job, you guys. Okay, behind us here's a little bit of barley. So let's just talk a little bit about what we got here. So I kind of got 3 stems here on this plant. What's this one? It's a tiller. Same as this one, right? So this is my main stem. Okay? So I've got a first leaf here that's senescing, and I see some spots on it. I've got a second leaf here with some little spots on it, a third leaf with a few spots, a fourth and a fifth. And what's this guy? That's the flag, and I can feel the head just starting to develop there in the boot. Okay, so for fungicide timing, we know that this flag leaf and the penultimate leaf and the head are going to be the major photosynthetic factory that's going to fill the head. So if there was a real risk of fungal leaf spot in this barley crop, we'd want to protect that. Now, I'm starting to see some leaf spotting occurring here on the lower leaves, so I know that there is some disease in there, but until it really starts getting up onto this upper canopy, it's not much of a threat, because I can sacrifice 10 to 20% of this leaf area without really having any yield penalty, and I can even sacrifice a little bit of photosynthetic area on these crops, on these leaves, and still not see a yield penalty. So this would be a situation where I'd continue to scout, and I'd watch to see if these spots continued to move up into the upper canopy, and if I felt like they were threatening my flag leaf and my penultimate leaf, then I'd consider a fungicide application. So in this situation, we can take a wait-and-see approach before we'd consider a fungicide.
Do you believe in a yield bump when you're spraying earlier fungicides?
How early?
Like at the 4-leaf stage. 4-leaf, 2 tillers.
So if I'm at the 4-leaf stage, 2 tillers, is there a yield bump to spraying a fungicide? All of the research I've seen has a really hard time showing any yield bump spraying the lower canopy leaves, because they don't contribute to yield essentially. Now, there's some cases where you're in a high-risk situation where you say you're growing wheat on wheat, where that situation could run away on you very quickly, and you might want to apply a herbicide or a fungicide earlier than flag leaf emergence. My recommendation is don't grow wheat on wheat, and then you won't need to spray the lower canopy leaves. Rotate your crops, and then just focus on these upper canopy leaves as being the ones you need to protect. Good question.
So then you would look at spraying, because there's some people that recommend putting a fungicide on and then going back in with the Fusarium fungicide. So I'm always torn between whether or not we need those 2 applications or not, or whether just going in with Fusarium and we're just waiting it out, because if the disease is only halfway, not even.
Yeah. So did everybody hear that? Because this is a really excellent question. What if I'm worried about leaf spot and head blight? Because leaf spot, what I just said was wait till flag leaf emergence and then spray if there's a threat of the disease moving up into there. Fusarium head blight timing is when? At anthesis, right, early anthesis. So when the head's out, and as soon as those anthers start coming out, early anthesis that's when you want to get the fungicide on there to protect it. So that's essentially telling you to spray 2 times. So a lot of people started asking the question, well, can I just, if I'm not overwhelmed with leaf spot pressure, can I just wait till early anthesis anyway and get the double whammy effect of controlling for Fusarium head blight at the same time as I'm managing this? So Randy Kuchar led a study at 3 sites in Saskatchewan and 3 sites in Alberta. So Farming Smarter was part of that. Our research farm in Brooks was part of that. And it was found that in sort of normal conditions where you don't have really, really heavy, severe disease pressure, there's no yield penalty in waiting until anthesis to spray your fungicide. So if you don't have a wreck in the making or a runaway leaf spot situation in the making, there's no yield penalty to waiting until the Fusarium timing, and you get control for both. So in this situation, we certainly could take that wait and see, and then if we were concerned, if we felt like we were at risk for Fusarium head blight, we could spray at early anthesis.
Any curative effect to some of these high-end fungicides?
So yeah, some any curative effect. So sort of. So the strobilurins are more of a protectant. They don't give you a ton of kickback. In some cases, for some of the strobies, there is some translaminar. But the triazole fungicides do tend to have a little bit more systemic, so they can help sort of in cases where there's a latent infection. So at the very, very early stages of infection, you can still get efficacy. But once you start to see full-blown lesions, you're not going to cure that with any product. So seeing full-blown lesions in the lower canopy, that's I'm going to continue to scout and see what happens. But if they stay in the lower canopy and don't start to threaten the upper canopy, then I'm not really at any risk to lose yield. And if I am going to if I'm in a high-risk situation for Fusarium head blight and I know that I'm going to want to protect for that, this is a situation where I'd look and say, I don't feel a real threat to the flag leaf. I'm going to wait. I'm going to continue to scout, but I'm going to wait and see if maybe just that one timing at anthesis is going to give me both my leaf spot control and my head blight control. Yep.
But if you do spray for leaf spot at this stage, are you going to reduce the pressure at the flag leaf stage?
So it depends on how much disease or fungus is in the crop, yes. If you've got fungus sort of developing in there and you apply your fungicide, absolutely, you're going to knock it back. And, it's really difficult to ever say to someone, you don't need to spray. You have to go out on a limb to say that, right? Because things could change in 10 minutes with the environment or, all kinds of things, and then you could end up being wrong. So it's applying a fungicide, if there's fungal leaf spot pathogens there, it's always going to provide some management of those. The question is, does it put money back in your pocket? And if that infection isn't threatening to reduce yield, then it won't put money in your pocket. So if you're curious to know, leave a check strip. And then look at your yield monitor come harvest time and see if, did you get an extra bushel or 2 or 5 because of the fungicide application.
Leaf forward.
What's that?
Leaf forward check strip.
4 check strips. Okay, I heard 4 check strips. That's better, yes. That would be a lot better.
Okay, Mike, so post-plant resistance, and sometimes you're wondering, and for example, and I'll use the example of stripe rust. I know Barney here, but we're talking stripe rust. So there's winter wheat fields that are really heavily infested with stripe rust out there right now. And then there's nearby spring wheat fields, durum or spring wheat. There's not a lot of spring wheat, a lot of durum out there. And you're starting to see, and you look at it and you say, okay, moderately resistant, but with the pressure and all that, you're kind of, some farmers probably scratching their heads, and I know some guys pulling the pin right now and saying, we're going to spray this, even though it's even a little bit early, because they're just worried about this getting away. And so, how do we, can we trust that we're seeing a little bit of stripe rust in these durum fields out in the country, but they're supposedly moderately resistant? Can you trust that that's going to hold it as it gets hotter? It's just a thing. And then the flip side of that question is, what's your diagnostic for seeing that stripe rust early? Because if we get into wetter conditions, if you wait till you start seeing the spores, and it's been working in that plant for a week or 10 days maybe, and so just the early diagnostic, I kind of got burned on that a few times in my a couple things here.
Thank you. Stripe rust is special. If you're in a situation where stripe rust is around and it could threaten your crop, you need to be scouting every other day to keep an eye on it. Because as Rob said, if you wait 5 days, you could go from a situation of not seeing stripes to being almost too late to get it under control with a fungicide. So you need to scout really regularly. Now there's 3 things that are going to play into answering your question. The first is the resistance package that comes with your variety. Okay, so if you have moderately resistant or resistant winter wheat or spring wheat or whatever, you need to know that first, because that's going to determine how much symptoms you can see on the plant before you need to act with a fungicide. The second is the crop stage, because if I start seeing stripe rust coming in at 3 to 4 leaf stage, and I'm growing a susceptible variety, I could essentially have 85% yield loss if I don't act. That's how potent stripe rust is. So if you have a susceptible variety and it's coming in, 3 to 4 leaf stage, you could lose the crop to stripe rust. But if you're growing a moderately resistant variety and it doesn't come in until heading, it's really only threatening about 20% of your yield loss. So it's still worth it to spray in that situation, but it's not quite as big of a risk. So number 1, check the resistance package of your variety. Number 2 is, at what stage does it show up? And then number 3, is it 35 above and no sign of rain in the forecast? Or is it for unsettled rainy weather for the next 2 weeks? That's going to play a big role as to what stripe rust is going to do. So and then the last thing I'll say is, once the crop comes out of flowering, the advantage of spraying a fungicide drops off almost, it just plummets. So when the crop is headed and comes out of flowering, your window to really prevent yield loss is done. Okay? So susceptible variety, as soon as you start seeing striping, you probably should think about a fungicide. If you're growing a moderately resistant variety, you can probably tolerate 10% of the leaf, 5 to 10% of the leaf area affected before you start to really get scared. And with a fully resistant variety, you can maybe go a little higher than that. But once you start to see 10 to 20% of the leaf area with stripes on it, you probably need to intervene with a fungicide regardless. Once you get to 50 or 60% of the leaf area affected, it's too late. You've lost control of the situation. So stripe rust is special. You have to stay ahead of it and scout frequently and be ready to pull the trigger when it's needed, keeping in mind the resistance package, the crop stage, and the forecast.
You still wait for that emergency on the flag, and since even if you see it there, you still kind of wait for the flag before you even get going a bit earlier.
So if I was growing a susceptible variety and stripe rust came in early, I would be prepared to spray more than twice. And I would want to rotate actives and chemical groups so that I didn't encourage resistance. But I would, if I'm growing a susceptible variety and I'm at the 4-leaf stage and I'm seeing striping, I'm going to go with a fungicide. I've got to get ahead of it, because if it gets ahead of me, it's too late. Now, if I'm growing a moderately resistant or a resistant variety and I start seeing, then I'm just going to scout daily or every other day to make sure that if it gets to over 5 to 10% of the leaf area affected, now I'm going to consider intervening. Now, hot weather also plays a role with high temperature adult plant resistance, which most of the stripe rust resistance genes that we have in our cereals contain. So the hot weather actually also improves the resistance capabilities of the host plant. So hot, dry weather is a detriment to the fungus being able to do its work, and it's an advantage to the plant's resistance genes. So last year, stripe rust overwintered. We saw it appear really early. Didn't ever really amount to much in most fields, and it was because the environment just really wasn't conducive for the fungus, and it was an advantage to our high temperature adult plant resistance genes. We're hoping to see the same thing this year. We know that it's in the winter wheat fields, and we know that last bit of rain really kind of caused a little bit of we started seeing it for the first time in Brooks after the rains, and we heard of winter wheat fields getting more and more symptoms. But we're hoping that this weather is going to turn the tide and it's going to kind of fizzle out again. Great questions.
So with Fusarium, everybody's basically got it. So are we actually doing anything when we're spraying for this fungicide with fungicides?
Okay, excellent. if you're relying on fungicides to control Fusarium head blight, that's a losing game. So Fusarium head blight's only going to be controlled by taking as many of the management tools as you can get your hands on and applying them all to the situation. So that's going to be number one, crop rotation. A good crop rotation is going to provide a nice firm foundation for your other management tools to work better. The second is going to be cultivar selection. So selecting a cultivar that has the best resistance package that works in your operation. And I know there's still some limitations, but boy, let me tell you, if you were to compare the varieties we had 10 years ago to the varieties we have now, we have a lot better resistance or tolerance for Fusarium than we did 10 years ago. So employing that, residue management, so it's a residue-borne disease. It's not a foundational management practice, but everything you can do to sort of bury the residue and encourage decomposition quicker is going to help. I know that flies in the face of minimum till or zero till, but if Fusarium becomes the biggest problem in your operation, you're going to want to throw every management tool at it that you can, and residue management is one of them. And then the last one is fungicides.
Yeah,
Thank you, Alan.
Most important one.
I forgot about irrigation. Don't irrigate during anthesis. Thank goodness Alan's here to remind me.
That's right.
Well done on the fact sheet on that, by the way.
Thanks. And what about the seeding rate? I know some people manipulate the seeding rate to reduce the tillering so that you have a shorter window of flowering.
So anything you can do to have your crop staging even, then when you apply your fungicide, you're going to have the maximum impact. So a higher seeding rate leads to less tillering, and then you don't have anthesis occurring at a bunch of different times. So yeah, a higher seeding rate can help, but really only in the situation of applying a fungicide, or if there was a Fusarium spore release that occurred at one time. If your whole crop is in flower at the same time, then you're either going to miss it or hit it, right? So that one can go either way. Yes?
You have two-stage emergence. So we had that this year with some hit moisture and some hit dry, so there's about a leaf difference.
So what if you have two-stage emergence? Staging issues are going to create some real problems because, and it's going to, so I guess the first thing I'll say is, if you're using good crop rotation, and you're using a variety that has good tolerance, and you're doing your irrigation scheduling as recommended, the staging, all those things are going to work regardless of staging. But staging is going to have an impact on the window of infection and the window for fungicide application. So in a staging, where you have staging kind of in different places or all over the map, it's going to make it harder to time your fungicide application if that's going to be needed. But it is also going to spread out your risk a little bit too. So if there's a major spore release, but only 20% of your crop is susceptible at the time, then you kind of spread your risk out across the field. So that the staging issue kind of takes you in both directions. I think really the take-home message is, if you rely on fungicides to control Fusarium, you're going to lose. We've got to poke at this from as many different angles as we can to get control of it.
It's going to be interesting. It might be the unique kind of situation this year where maybe some of these diseases, like the Fusarium, gets kind of flushed out or falls up, flush out before our spring weeds actually get that stage up. Just because we seem to be ahead of the game in terms of ignorance, and I don't know exactly if anyone's done that yet.
I'm not aware of any. But for a lot of diseases, that's a really interesting question, is, the fact that we're so far ahead of sort of a normal year. Are our crops going to be, are they going to miss that window of infection in some cases? Fusarium's pretty prevalent, and it's quite successful at surviving in our environments, so there's probably going to be spores flying around regardless. But it'll be interesting to see if it gives us an advantage being a little bit ahead.
Did you say ban corn?
Ban Durham.
I thought you said ban growing corn in No.
Yeah.
Pathologist before Mike.
Yeah, I'm not going to advocate banning corn because I grew up in Tabor, so I'm going to advocate for corn production. But it is a good point that corn is an excellent host for Fusarium graminearum, and we will see Fusarium become more of an issue as corn becomes more of a more common in the rotation, especially with small grain cereals. Having said that, any susceptible variety is going to do a similar thing, but corn is a little bit special. It's a really excellent host. Using those principles, though, of rotation, crop tolerance, irrigation scheduling, fungicides, we can manage Fusarium, so regardless of whether corn's in the rotation or not. But corn will, Fusarium will be maybe a little more prevalent with the more corn stubble we have around. Yeah. So no, keep growing corn, guys.
Job security.
There's lots of corn, wheat, soybean rotations in the States. Then how big of a problem is it for them then?
Yeah, so Fusarium head blight is one of the major production impediments for small grain cereals in those areas where there's a lot of corn in rotation. And they've had real serious losses.
Spring wheat?
What's that?
Is there a difference between winter wheat versus spring wheat though?
Well, you can, like what we just talked about with that window of infection, because the winter cereals flower a little earlier, sometimes you can dodge the bullet. So there will be that, but I mean, really the answer is we need to be using the best genetics that we can, and we need to be employing good crop rotations and irrigation scheduling, and then applying fungicides in the cases where it's going to provide an economic benefit.
Any final questions for Mike? Well, join me in thanking Mike. We do have lunch back at the tent, so